What's going on YouTube? Josh here checking in. I just wanted to follow up on my last video where I discussed basically why you would want to deadlift either sumo or conventional. So in this video I wanted to discuss basically some tips on how to make the switch to going sumo. That's assuming that most people start conventional, which tends to be the case. So if you're a conventional puller and for whatever reason you decide that you're going to try out sumo, a few tips that I have are, first off, obviously you have to give yourself some patience. Right? This lift is going to use muscles differently than the conventional deadlift. Of course, they're both deadlifts, so there will be some similarities, but there'll definitely be a lot more engagement of your hips, your glutes, and those muscles may be, you're not used to using them, and maybe you're not used to the motor pattern. So honestly, it does take about 6 to 8 weeks just to really develop that motor pattern of doing the movement correctly and engaging the muscles at the right time, etc. So definitely patience is really important. Now, aside from patience, which is kind of just common sense, a few things that I'll mention are, first off, you have to consider what your starting mobility is. Now, a mistake that a lot of people make when they're switching to sumo is basically they just go online and they look at videos on YouTube, they see people who have experience pulling sumo, and then they basically just mimic that form. I would definitely not advise that due to the fact that most people who do that are very comfortable with the lift and have a fair amount of experience doing so. Most people tend to not really have the mobility necessary to go right into a wide sumo stance pulled out with correct form. What I would advise is basically starting with a sort of modified sumo stance, where your legs are kind of a little bit closer in than you'd see on most people pulling sumo. Basically just outside of where your hands would be. Keep in mind your hand position should be basically underneath your shoulders, in line with your shoulders. So if you start with your legs kind of just outside that position, that would be almost like a hybrid stance. I would recommend starting with that and slowly working your way out. Now, some people who have really poor mobility will have difficulty even getting down to the bar. Now, if this applies to you, what I would recommend is basically starting with block pulls and progressively diminishing the amount of assistance that you're getting from the block pulls. So for example, what you might want to do is start with a high block, say around 8 inches or so, which should bring the bar to just below your knee. And then week by week, slowly decrease the amount that the blocks are helping you. So basically you would maybe go 8 inches on the first week, and then the following week you could do 6 inches, and then 4 inches, and then 2 inches, and then finally pull off of the floor. This will help you kind of get more comfortable into that position, because honestly the starting position is really important, and if you really just can't get into a good starting position from the start due to your mobility, slowly working your way into it by starting with the block pulls is definitely a method that can help you out. So since you're going to be dropping the weight to be working on your form and building yourself up, one thing that's important to note is that you want to follow a linear progression when you're doing this. Even if you're an intermediate or an advanced lifter and you're used to doing a more advanced kind of progression scheme, such as a more periodized approach as opposed to a basic linear progression, I would advise that you actually don't do a more advanced approach, because you're basically a novice when it comes to the sumo deadlift. So you want to basically increase the weight every week, and potentially also the volume depending on your capabilities. Now, since you will be dropping the weight, one thing to consider is, should you continue to deadlift conventional? And basically my recommendation would be to continue deadlifting conventional. Basically I would deadlift twice a week, max 3 times a week. But basically, because you're going to be significantly dropping the total load that you'll be deadlifting due to the decreased weight of the sumo deadlift, I would recommend, at least initially when you're in this transition until your sumo deadlift kind of approaches the weights that you were used to using for your conventional deadlift, I would definitely recommend where you sort of have the days spread apart nicely throughout the week and you deadlift 1 day conventional and 1 day sumo. That way you don't really see any decrease in your long-term strength. Now, of course, once your sumo deadlift gets stronger and you're more comfortable using that, you can choose to exclusively deadlift sumo, and I don't think that's necessarily an issue. I personally like to deadlift conventional, and I continue to do so, and I know a lot of powerlifters also choose to do that just in the instance that, say, they have a hip injury and they're in a competition and, deadlifting sumo is very uncomfortable for them. The fact that they still have some practice with the conventional deadlift allows us so that way, on the spur of the moment, they can switch to that other stance. Now, those are just some basic tips that I have for switching to the sumo deadlift. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, be sure to give it a like. If you're not a subscriber already, hit that subscribe button. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to comment below. And if you guys have any tips for when you switch to the Sumo Deadlift, definitely share those below so that way the other subscribers can see what you guys have to offer. So anyway guys, I'll catch you in the next video.